Tonight, we step into the most dangerous place in all of history, a royal wardrobe. Welcome to the Palace of Versailles, where the biggest threat to your survival is not a sword, a plague, or a poisoned goblet. It is wearing the wrong shade of blue. Here, your outfit could get you mocked, banished, fined, or quietly destroyed by a room full of aristocrats who have nothing better to do than judge your shoes. Could you survive a morning where buttoning the wrong coat counted as an insult to the king? Ever needed royal permission to wear a jacket? Congratulations! You have just woken up at the Palace of Versailles. The year is 1682. You own nothing appropriate to wear. Everyone is staring at your feet. And you have roughly 10 minutes to figure out the rules before you embarrass yourself in front of the Sunday King himself. Good luck. At Versailles, even getting dressed is a minefield. Back home, you throw on whatever is clean. Here, your clothing is not a personal choice. It is practically a legal document, a passport, and a public confession of your exact rank, all stitched into one wildly uncomfortable outfit. The fabric announces your wealth. The color announces your status. The cut announces whether you belong to the inner circle, or whether you are simply a well-dressed tourist who wandered into the wrong wing and you cannot even dress yourself. The outfits are so elaborate, so layered, so full of ties and pins and hidden fastenings that getting into them requires an entire team of servants working in coordinated silence. Your arms go up. Fabric descends over you like a very expensive tent, and hands you cannot see begin tugging, lacing, and adjusting until you have been assembled rather than dressed. By the time you are finished, you are wearing what feels like your entire net worth, and you can barely lift your own arms. Let us talk about the single most exclusive jacket in human history. Somewhere in the palace, roughly 15 men are wearing a specific blue coat, lined in red, and dripping with gold and silver embroidery. It looks fabulous. You want one. You cannot have one. This coat is called the Just au Cabret, and you are not allowed to wear it unless the king himself has personally signed a warrant, granting you permission to put on a jacket. You need paperwork from the most powerful man in Europe, the king, wanting a way to reward his favorites without handing out money he would rather keep. Invented an honor made of fabric. A limited number of these coats existed, each with a written brevet, confirming your right to wear it. The number was capped. Scarcity is what made it precious. The king figured out that man would scheme, flatter, and grovel for years, not for land, not for gold, but for the right to wear a particular shade of blue. And they did. It was pure status, distilled into a garment, and it cost the crown almost nothing to grant. Somewhere, a very clever accountant was extremely proud. Now look down at your feet, because your shoes are about to betray you. At Versailles, the heels of your shoes are painted a bright glossy red, but only if you were somebody. Red heels, the famous talons ruches, are the not so subtle signal that you have been welcomed into the king's inner orbit. The king wears them, his favorites wear them, and everyone else stares longingly at their own sad, unpainted souls. It was the 17th century version of a velvet rope, except the rope is on your shoes, and everyone in the room is checking your ankles to decide whether you are worth talking to. A flash of red beneath a shoe was a tiny glossy claim to power, visible every time you took a step. People at court learned to glance downward discreetly, checking heels the way a modern person might check for a wedding ring. And here is the cruel part. You could have all the money in the world and still not be allowed the red heel, because it was never about money. It was about proximity to the king. If you are a woman at court, brace yourself, because it is time to put on the grand habit. This is the most formal gown at Versailles, and it was clearly designed by someone who deeply resented the human body. Picture a rigid bone bodice that crushes your ribs into a fashionable cone, sleeves that pin your arms, and a neckline that bears your shoulders to the freezing palace air. You cannot slouch, you cannot fully sit, you can barely breathe, and you are expected to wear this for hours while smiling serenely, as if your entire torso is not currently being hugged to death by whalebone and ambition. You did not wear the grand habit so much as inhabit it, the way a hermit crab inhabits a shoe whale that is technically too small. Sitting was where things got truly absurd. You perched, you leaned, you arranged yourself against furniture in careful ways that suggested rest without ever quite achieving it. The whole point of the grand habit was to make immense discomfort look effortless. The suffering was supposed to be invisible. The elegance was supposed to be total. It was a magic trick performed with your own compressed organs. Let us talk about wearing actual metal at the very top of the Versailles wardrobe. Sits cloth of gold and cloth of silver, textiles literally woven with real metal thread, so that the wearer shimmers like a walking chandelier. Naturally, everyone wants to glitter, and just as naturally, the crown decided that you probably should not, passing laws about who could wear these precious fabrics and how much of them. Because nothing threatens a monarchy quite like a minor baron outsparkling the king at dinner. Craftsmen wove thin strands of real precious metal into the fabric, creating a material that caught the light and threw it back in a way ordinary silk simply could not. Under the candlelight of a grand hall, a person dressed in cloth of gold did not just look wealthy, they looked lit from within. The trouble was that spectacle is competitive. If any rich noble could drape themselves head to toe in shimmering metal, the whole careful system of who outshone whom would dissolve into an undignified glitter contest. So limits appeared. Your position in society was supposed to be legible in how much light you reflected. You were quite literally wearing money. A single garment could represent a sum that could have bought land, livestock, or the loyalty of a small army. Now we come to one of the strangest battles in fashion history, the Great War over lace. Lace is everywhere, foaming out of cuffs, and collars like edible sea foam, but not just any lace, French lace. Because at some point the crown realized that all the nobles were spending fortunes on delicate, imported lace from places like Venice, and that money was flowing straight out of France. So the solution was simple: ban the foreign stuff, build a French lace industry, and treat a smuggled Venetian collar like contraband. Yes, you could genuinely get in trouble over your neckwear. Fine lace was absurdly labor-intensive, made by hand through painstaking work that took enormous skill and enormous time. That made it precious, and precious things become status symbols. The crown's response was a masterstroke of economic strategy dressed up as fashion policy. If the nobles were going to spend fortunes on lace, that money would stay home. It was patriotism. You could wear the wrong lace, the foreign lace, the smuggled lace became a small act of defiance against the crown's economic wishes. The king had turned vanity into industry. Rarely has a monarchy so successfully weaponized peer pressure. Let us talk about colors, because at Versailles, even the rainbow has a class system, certain shades, especially the deep, expensive dyes that took enormous effort to produce were quietly understood to be off limits to anyone who was not important enough to pull them off. A particular royal blue, a certain regal purple, the richest reds. These were not just pretty, they were statements. The reason colors carried such weight comes down to how they were made. In an age before synthetic dyes, achieving a rich, deep, vivid color was tremendously difficult and expensive. The most saturated, luminous shades were inherently costly. A truly deep, glowing color announced wealth before it announced anything else. This scarcity sorted colors into a hierarchy. The most difficult shades became associated with the highest ranks. To wear them without the standing to back it up was to reach for something that was not yours, and everyone would notice the reach. You learn to read a room by its colors. A sea of muted, modest tones, with a few brilliant figures blazing at the center, told you instantly where the power sat. The punishment for getting it wrong was not a fine. It was worse. It was the quiet, devastating judgment of the court. Gentlemen, we need to talk about your accessories, specifically the pointy one. At Versailles, a man of any standing does not leave his rooms without a dressed sword hanging at his side. It is not for fighting. Heaven forbid you actually use it. It is simply required. A badge that says you are a gentleman and not some random person who wandered in off the road. In fact, the palace was so strict about this that visitors who showed up without a proper sword could rent one at the entrance along with a hat just to be allowed inside. Imagine being turned away from the fanciest building on earth and hearing, "Sorry, no sword, no entry, but the coat check has a spare." Notice the strangeness here. The sword was essential, mandatory, unquestionable, and yet actually using it in the halls of the palace would have been an unthinkable scandal. This was a weapon that existed almost entirely as decoration and declaration. It hung at your side, doing nothing, saying everything. The symbol mattered more than the substance. Nobody checked whether you could fence. Your worthiness to walk the halls could be assembled on the spot from the palace equivalent of a supply closet. So there you have it. At Versailles, your clothes spoke louder than you ever could, and they mostly said something embarrassing. Every morning was a rank test, a color test, a fabric test, and a silent panel of aristocratic judges scoring you on all of them at once. The wrong coat could mark you as a nobody. The wrong lace could make you a smuggler. The wrong color could quietly damage your standing for years. And the wrong shoes could announce to an entire hall that you did not belong. You survived the morning. Barely, but the evening ceremony is approaching, and someone has already noticed a small flaw in your ensemble and filed it away for future gossip. Welcome to Versailles, where even your heels had opinions about you, and where the most dangerous thing you could wear was the confidence that you belonged.